and welcome to ZED Talks. And today I've got a really super exciting guest who I met quite recently, was introduced to me through a mutual connection, and I love her, girl crush. Her name is Justine Whitaker. She is with me today, and she's a Chief
Oh,
People Officer. And so today, Justine and I want to talk about choices and decisions, and maybe when we reflect on them, how we've chosen and made our decisions has absolutely led us down a specific route or path that we couldn't have imagined once upon a time ago, and maybe phases of life and how we make decisions and all of those good things. So I'm going to let Justine do her introduction and then we're going to get into it. So welcome, Justine. Thank you for being here.
thanks, Zoe. It's such a lovely warm welcome. I almost want to dial off and come back in so you can do it again. And it's
I'll do it
great. Look,
anytime you like. Anytime you like.
thank you, thank you. Well, look, hello everyone. It's great to be joining Zoe today. I'm Justine Whitaker, and despite the Kiwi accent, my life is now here in the UK, in the Hereford countryside. I'm an organisational psychologist in terms of my studies. So I've always been interested in why I do what I do and why others do what they do. And so that's led me to building quite an eclectic career in both the northern and southern hemisphere, and publicly and privately listed businesses. And the theme of choice is just spot on for today, because in all of my career choices and many of my life choices, I've wound up in places I never would have imagined in my wildest dreams. So a really good example of one of those is I am Pākehā, so of European descent, but I wound up being one of the very first senior chief people officers for Te Rananga o Ngaitahu, who is an indigenous Māori tribe. And of all of the places I thought I might have wound up in my career, working for a First Nations peoples was such a privilege and continues to be a privilege of my career. But it's a place I never thought I would have wound up. So talking today about all those choices that have shaped us and taken us where we are is a really, really fascinating topic for
And
me.
you're fascinating. So, I mean, Indigenous tribal. I mean, I have never had any experience about that, and I'm dying to know. That's a quite a choice to say. I'm dying to know, desperate to know how that is. But first, before we get into that, I'd love to know your choices. So you mentioned you're a Kiwi, and the accent obviously gives that away. So for anyone that doesn't know the accent, Justine has a beautiful New Zealand accent, and you are now in the UK in Herefordshire. And I'd love you to tell us how your choices have led you to be from New Zealand into Herefordshire.
Mm. So it's a great question, Zoe. So the short story is, after a very diabolical marriage breakup, which is incredibly sad, I put my big girl undies on and decided that I had an appetite and a willingness to give love another try. My path crossed with a very handsome, blue-eyed Englishman who I had actually met 25 years ago. He happened to be in New Zealand on business. Our paths crossed, and I spent a little bit of time with him and enjoyed his company. Invited myself to the UK for New Year's to hear Big Ben chime midnight, and my handsome blue-eyed Englishman also said, well, while you're here, why don't I take you to Paris and France for a week? And by the way, I speak fluent French. Well, he speaks fluent French. So it was absolutely brilliant. So safe to say, the next chapter of my romantic life developed. My boss, Jill Folks, when I was back at IAG, had a great relationship with her. She cared about me professionally and personally. And I said to her, would you let me have a sabbatical for love? And so the plan was to pack up my life in New Zealand, take a sabbatical from I work at a publicly listed company in Sydney, and see how the romantic relationship worked. And I said to Jill, if it doesn't work, I'll see you Monday and I'll be back. And if it does work, I will let you know, and you can release my role. So safe to say, the relationship has worked. And so my life is now in the UK, and it will be a happily ever after, looking to get married at some stage in 2026 to the handsome blue-eyed Englishman.
Wow. And when was this, Justine? Like, what a love story. I
Yeah, it's
mean,
a great story,
I,
isn't
I've
it?
got so many things to ask about that, but how many years ago was that, or months
Yeah,
ago,
yeah,
weeks
no,
ago?
about 8 years ago. So so that meant that once I decided to stay, I needed sponsored employment, which I knew nobody other than Dan, or very few people. So there was a lot of luck and a lot of coffees and networking to secure those roles when I was new to the Northern Hemisphere. Um, and then continue that secured employment which you require when you're here on a sponsored
Yes. Yeah.
visa for a 6 year window. So yeah, it was I love the story because Jill, my boss at the time, could have said no,
Yeah.
but I told her the truth. She cared about me as an individual, and we had a genuine understanding that the moment I was confident I was going to stay here, I would let her know. Or if the experiment didn't work, I could turn around, jump on a plane, and go home again. So it's a nice story about choices, because I did take some options, but I had also planned, if it didn't work, what would my plan B be?
Yes.
Which I think is very important when you're making some of those choices. Part of the courage to make the choice comes from knowing that if I have to reverse out of this for some
Yes.
reason, is there a soft landing that I would be comfortable with if plan A doesn't
Wow.
you must have done things like that, Zoe, in your life and your career.
Yes, yes. And I met somebody when I was in my early 20s, and he's an Englishman but lived in the US, and I fell very head over heels in love and
Mm.
thought that this would be my happy ever after, but it didn't quite work out that way. And
Mm.
and I think that I made some really conscious decisions and choices back then, because I said I didn't want to have children or get married, and that sort of, basically killed the relationship.
Mm.
And that was talking from a deep wound. My dad had been very absent, and had
Um,
been in prison quite a long, lengthy experience in my childhood. So my wound, my response to I'm not getting married and having kids, because I didn't want my children to grow up with any similarity, and I was very young, so I didn't realize that I could make choices and decisions that would,
mm.
change and alter that path. So yeah, but I think it's super brave to literally you move the other side of the world. Had you ever been to England before?
Fleetingly, just as all Kiwis do, we do our OE and pack our backpack and take 6 weeks post university and go and do a bit of sightseeing in Europe. But literally, it was a complete blank piece of paper for me. But great fun, um, a great opportunity to do something that I never thought in a million years I would, and it's worked out better than I could possibly have imagined. So, there is a time and a place to take a really deep breath, have a
Mm,
quiet, assured sense of the universe will, whatever you might believe in terms of universal forces, will see you right, and nothing is permanent. Nothing, there's
yeah,
very little that can't be undone. So I'm a big believer in the sort of Buddhist concept of impermanence and things are perpetually changing.
Yes, we
And
have that in common. I know that when we first sort of found each other, there was this resonance around, I don't think that I'm a traditional thinker, and I don't think you are
mm,
too, from
mm,
our interactions and our conversations that we have, which are, I favour deep intellectual conversation rather than surface nonsense. That's just the person I am.
yeah.
It didn't used to be that way. I kind of have a deep need, and I think it comes from also because we are psychologists, that we
Mm,
maybe have had experience or exposure. For anybody listening in, when you study psychology, or there's you have some, and I will make a distinction, that academic psychology, so you have applied and you have clinical psychology as disciplines. And I will say that anybody that studies this as a form of academia, you cannot go through it without being affected by what you learn. You have to
mm,
go through on a rabbit hole, and there are things that you will have to go through in terms of your inner state. Your learning is not just an external learning to self. There is
mm,
introspection, there is inner self-inquiry, there is all sorts of things that lead back to the self. And like, why do we do the things we do? Why do others do the things they do? Why do we say the things? Why do we all of these things are that we learn about the world around us and others. We can't help but turn the fingers back into self. And I think that stimulates a very, or let's say, a raised level of consciousness or awareness
mm.
around maybe our choices and our decisions. I don't know if that resonates for you, but I certainly know most of the psychologists I know have agreed or have a similarity in the view that I come with.
Yes. Yeah, totally agree. Totally agree, Zoe. And there is a sort of a metacognition piece. So there is a piece where we're thinking about our why we have done what we have done. Then we'll run around the other side of the table and wonder how is that making another person feel. So we'll get to other side. Then we'll go up onto the balcony, look down with a more omniscient view and go, well, look, based on what we've said and how we made the other feel, how have we changed the dynamic of the situation that we've been part of? And all of this is not happening sequentially, it's all happening concurrently. So there is a lot of time spent in our own minds, in our own heads. So I think sometimes for those of us that are psychologists and making choices, we need to get out of our own head into
Yep.
other facets of our consciousness and
Yep.
into our bodies. So one of the things I've been thinking a lot about, and we've chatted about this, Zoe, around our bodies keeping score, and how, yes, there's lots happening up here, but there are other parts of us that often get forgotten that, we need to listen and be aware of, like, how am I feeling in my body? What is my body telling me? What is my heart rate telling me? What is just my general kind of senses telling me? And all of that becomes really important data that helps make our choices. Do you find you're in your head a lot, or is that just
Yes.
me?
No, no, no. So I think that, living in this top part of our brain, and for those that aren't looking, I'm just kind of indicating my forehead. And I'm reminded that last week, Justine and I were at an event. So I was facilitating, and the previous year, Justine had been the facilitator. That's actually how we were introduced. And what I was struck by is, so most people that know me know that I say dabble. I work in AI and technology on a day-to-day basis. And as we went to this event last week, which is talking about AI and how to embrace it within the fundamentals of HR, what was struck me is that we drove up to this very grand place called Weston Park in Shropshire. And I was, as I was driving up this magnificent drive, which is just, it's woodlands and fields and greenery, I was taken very much out of my head into now my aesthetic. There's this open, I felt this, gosh, I get quite emotional thinking about it. I felt this aspect of spaciousness, which you have to be really aware of. We can live our day-to-day lives. We can decide to live our day-to-day lives by sleepwalking. And I sort of, as the drive was there, I was like, oh my gosh, I'm immersed in this nature, this landscape before me, and I can be in it and feel a part of it, or I can just be an observer and kind of stay in my head. And I think when, certainly from my perspective, if I'm facilitating anything, then I am kind of in the moment of being a facilitator, and I'm worried about the setup. I'm worried to get there and get the setup right, and make sure that the room's warm and receptive, and make sure all the tools are working. So I'm kind of distracted in the head again. And as I was driving up to Weston Park and I parked, I got out and I went into the gardens immediately, and the silence was also then, so the sound, the birds, it wasn't silence, it was silent on the score of there's nobody around, there's no voices, but it was very captivating in terms of nature. And then of course they've got plants, and then there's a gardener, and I saw the gardener working, and I felt like the gardener. I felt like I was not thinking, I felt like I was connected to everything around me. I was a part of the experience, and the smell of like fresh grass, and it was a sunny morning. It was just so beautiful, and there I was, there to be on the opposite side of this feeling, which is literal and logical and not somatic in any way, shape or form. And it was just so duality, like polarity for me. And it really was this moment of, I had this, and I know why I was emotional, because it's come to me now. I realized that this is my purpose, to bring these two worlds together. Like, I'm here to do that. I'm here to be this bridge, this conduit between this being. So the feminine is all about the being, and the masculine is all about the doing. And I realized that that's kind of, AI is the real doing, and as a human we need to be. And how do we bring these two worlds together, consciously, with choice and deliberation? And that to me was so profound, and it really stayed with me. And I was wondering why I was feeling quite emotional, and is because I think that AI has the ability to think for us in many ways, and make us devoid of these somatic experiences if we allow it. And I don't want to allow that. I want us to play and have, time as humans to do that humanly thing, and be outside of this. As children, we're not in here. As children, we're not living in here. We're living free and in our heart space and running around. And there's a little child in all of us. So I think that life can be very heavy sometimes, and the choices and decisions we make are heavy. And so I felt that kind of like that unburdened moment of like utter freedom being in that space. And it was just delightful. So that's a long ass winded way, wasn't it, to say about that? But it was lovely. I loved it. I reveled
It's
in
a
it.
wonderful story, Zoe, and I think you definitely have found your calling. And one of the things I was thinking about this morning, was we just touched on the proliferation of AI. It will do so much. It will take over so much, which is why being authentically human and embracing all of our humanity will become even more important. And if you happen to be one of those really unique individuals who can create a bridge for others between the two, then I think you have a very important and very powerful role to play. And I definitely see you as being one of those bridges between the two, thinking about how that artificial intelligence can be integrated, utilized, harnessed for the better of
Yes.
humanity. So I think you've got a wonderful role to play, and I'm delighted that you've found your purpose. And there is such a I come from, my most recent role was in private equity, which is a lot of spreadsheets and a lot of numbers. And one of the things I learned in private equity was that feelings or sensations or observations are also data. They are just another kind of data. So just because it is not in a spreadsheet or does not have an Excel icon or some kind of pivot table behind it does not mean that it is not data. So all of these inputs are wonderful sources of information and data upon which we can make good decisions, or that can reinforce decisions that were perhaps made but not in awareness or consciousness next. So I think there's a great lesson in there around seeing data as
Yes.
made up of lots of sources of information, and that might include your intuition, your
Oh,
senses.
absolutely. And
Your
I know,
emotion.
Justine, you've been an avid fan of like listening to the other podcasts that I've done.
Mm,
And it will be no stranger to you to talk when I talk about, the body as a sat navigation, a GPS system.
yeah.
We are made of energy, and that's undisputable because it is a scientific fact. And I
Mm,
believe that in an electronic field, which is the cosmo, the galactic, this
mm,
energy field that is our atmospheric, and we know that there is an energy field. We all exist in this field, that we are pulsating information all the time. And
mm,
so when the body gets typically, I've learned through the years, as a transpersonal psychologist, and that may not make so much sense to other people, but if you look at Abraham Maslow, who is a humanistic psychologist, and everyone knows there's a hierarchy of needs model, self-actualization, how do you get there?
mm,
He was a godfather of transpersonal, and transpersonal means to transcend beyond the ego, one's ego. So how do we get beyond our kind of physical self? How do we get beyond the consciousness of what we believe? Okay, so and I then it then makes me think that, or I come to all sorts of decisions and choices that I feel and think that we are such a transmitter. We are like a transmitter. So our energy, we are receiving and
mm,
giving information, data
mm,
continuously all the time. And
mm,
actually, I've come to learn that for me, when something is very right in my body, I get
mm,
a tingling sensation, and it feels like either a bucket of water has been chucked over me, like I feel like I
wow.
want to shudder. That's my
Mm,
sensation of what is agreement, and I have it as I'm speaking now. And in
wow.
there'll be an area in my body. So everybody's got a place in their body which holds tension, or maybe the weakest part of their body, and that could be the shoulders, the neck, the stomach, the knees, the hips. It could be a plethora of places. Some people get a twitch. Some people, I know,
Mm,
whatever it is. Mine is in the pit of my stomach, so I will get like a real. It feels like somebody has literally got their fist and twisted within my stomach, and that's a no. That's how I've come to kind of know. So when I
wow.
think about decisions and choices, I
Mm,
always check in with my body and ask the question, like, is this the right thing for me? So when you were making your decision to leave New Zealand, keeping on the same thread,
mhm,
what told you that this was the right thing to do? I mean, I know that people fall in love, and I
mm,
don't know that I've experienced that in I don't know, because it's all very subjective about what love
mm,
is and how we experience it. What was
mm,
the signal or the thing that was like, was this a question? Was it even no question? It was just a yes.
mm,
How did you decide to uproot your life? You did have an exit plan, granted. So
mm,
you kind of
mm,
said, if it goes wrong, I've got a backup plan.
mm,
But what was it that, or if you can remember,
mhm.
what was it that made you kind of go, I'm going to do this, or I must do this, or I'm taking the chance, I'm making the leap? Was there much deliberation, or did you just go,
Mm,
yes, I'm doing it?
mm. Well, let me tell you about that. But just before I do that, you said no is like a clenching. What does yes feel like in your body?
The tingles, the
Oh, the
I
tingles.
get
Okay, that's
the almost like the shuddering, and I will
mm,
also feel, I trust myself enough to know that there is no sitting on the fence when something is right. If there is
okay.
any question or any doubt or any, And I say that with a, is this, it's a no.
Mm.
Because I
And
know myself well enough to know that if something is, there is an absolute, I mean, I might need to sit on something and I might need
yeah,
to ponder because there are consequences because of cause and effect. So I'm
yeah.
very much like, if I do this, there is a polarity that I need to consider if it's a big decision. But most of the time, there'll be an innate feeling, and that feeling is either it's an endorsement, yes, or it's a no. Yeah.
Mm. And then what happens where your head says yes, but your stomach says mm-mm? Who prevails?
So that's a really, really good question. Um, I'm a believer that when I'm at dis-ease in something, then not to do anything right this moment. I need to go into, for me, it's into deep meditation. It's into
Mm,
questioning, like, why am I experiencing it? So I like to think of, like, what is it that I'm really grappling with? Because I hear some people say language like, that's never happened to me, or everyone always does this. It's a cognitive distortion. I'm like, well, that's not the truth, really, is it? But I don't say
mm,
that.
mm,
I just kind of like observe that. But I also have this within my own mind. And then I'm like, okay, I'm distorting here. And
mm,
so I will get a pen and paper, which is on my sofa behind me, and I
mm.
will journal, and I will deep inquiry, and I will take myself to a place. Now, I might not get an answer immediately because there is something else that needs to unfold before that decision is made.
Yes.
But typically, there'll be a moment where I go, I get it. And now I'm ready to make the decision. So I can ask myself
Mm,
again, and there is no conflict. There will be a governance. And where I grapple with my heart and my head, I
mhm.
now, because one distinction, some people can't tell the difference between what is a head thought and what is a
Mhm.
heart feeling. And you'll
Oh.
notice that most people will express it through I think or I feel. And so
Mhm.
if you're a thinker, you'll say I think. And if you're a feeler, you say I feel. And sometimes you'll have somebody that says I think and feel, which means they're balancing their hemispheres between these 2 points. And I always say the shortest in distance, the heart and the head, but the longest journey to actually come into some kind of resonance. But I know that very clearly a decision will be made and I will feel the way, and that's what I will go with, despite my head
Mm,
saying that's wrong, don't do it, or yes, you must. um
mhm.
I follow now what is the heart, the quietness of the heart.
Oh. There's a whole podcast just on that, Zoe, isn't it? That is such great wisdom. The head, the head thought or the heart
Feel. Mm,
feeling.
mm,
Yeah, I was just going to say that I think that makes another great reflection point as we're talking about making choices, that sometimes it's not yes or no, sometimes it's not yet, yes but a little bit later, or I don't know at the moment because I need to consult my pillow. I need to sleep on it. It's an incomplete data set. So there's someone else I would like to talk to test the idea. So I think sometimes when it comes to making choices, we can put a lot of pressure on ourselves to say yes or no at the
mm.
time in quite a binary way. Whereas there's lots of lovely luminal spaces in between yes or no where you can take a little bit more time to pause, stop,
Yes.
gather more information, sleep on it.
Be with it, like be
Yeah,
with
just sit.
the pondering of the, and I can, my nephew left for Australia last week and it really took me back.
Yeah.
It took me back in terms of I was super emotional. I didn't
Mm,
really understand why, but what I realized on reflection is that I left at 20 to work in America. I
mm,
left where there was no communication, no technology that would allow
mm,
me to communicate in the way that we know how today. We didn't have FaceTime or phones. It was pigeon, snail mail, It was, I used to get a card that looked a bit like this size, and you scratch off the number and the code, and you wait for
Oh,
a station, where there's phone booths and there's a queue of you, and you've got to wait in the queue. And of course, people were speaking to their families. They're on the phone for about an hour. And so there were some
mm,
weeks that I couldn't speak because I was too far in the queue, and I had to get back
oh,
on the ship, go to work. And I sometimes didn't speak to my mum for like 3 or 4 weeks, and how that must have felt for her.
oh,
So what
yeah.
I was experiencing was in a very different way. Like, my nephew can communicate at any time through WhatsApp. He can WhatsApp, he can do
Mm,
video calls. We've got, this plethora of tools, even like what we're doing today. It's not like
mm,
it was 30 years ago, 31 years ago when I left. And
mm,
I think there was a part of me, that 20-year-old self, that was reliving the feeling of
mm,
leaving and not knowing when I might speak or be able to. I certainly couldn't see them. We didn't have video
mm,
conferencing. So for
mm.
my first contract was nearly a year, and I didn't see my family for a year. And
Wow.
but we're, of course, we're very different now. So, but it really took me back thinking, oh my gosh, like, he's so young. And I was thinking,
Mm,
he's 22. I was 20 when I left, but his experience is not mine.
mm, mm,
So, he made the choice to go, which I fully embrace, and say the university of life, moving to a different country, I think is as valid as a university, if not more than a university education. And
mm,
why? Because you have to learn to think in the moment for yourself. You have to be resourceful. You have to fend for yourself. You will, and this, there's this expression which says the youth is wasted on the young. And I think that that's a really apt expression, because what we
mm.
realize when we're older is, I've realized that I've lived in fight, flight, freeze for probably a good 25 years.
Wow.
And I don't think when I was younger, I realized that your senses, your sixth senses, are the things that keep you safe. They tell you if there's trouble on the horizon. They tell you if you're unsafe. They tell you all
Mm,
the things. So when my nephew was leaving to the airport, the one thing I said to him is, trust your instincts
mm.
at any given moment. If you think it's wrong and you feel it's wrong, it's wrong.
Yeah. Yeah, I think it's very good advice you gave him, and to your point about instincts, they are built from experience, and our DNA and our evolutionary capability has built us such that our instincts and our intuition keep us safe. It's a survival of the
Yeah,
fittest.
absolutely, absolutely. So I'm going to go back to the question around
Yeah,
your leaving. What was the
yeah,
trigger
yeah,
moment for you? What did you feel or
yeah.
think?
Look, it felt very like, I think when I've made big life decisions on other topics before, there has been a level of agonizing before and agonizing afterwards, whereas this felt like a natural progression for me. There was just a level of calmness and a level of kind of almost serenity to go, this is something that I would really like to do. I feel quietly confident in it. So it was more a sense of calmness, a sense of sort of assuredness, and a sense of curiosity that let's let's examine this, let's explore this. And I really hope it will work. And if it doesn't work in terms of the romantic piece, it will work out anyway.
You
So
trusted, you knew.
in that instance, less anguish and tossing and turning, and more a quiet coming to an inflection in my life which felt very, very natural. That said, you do have to just take pause and listen for that, rather than rushing around like a headless chicken. You do just need to your point before, sit with it a little bit and go, how do I feel? And in this instance, I felt quietly assured, curious, and relatively calm. So
I
I
love
think
that
there's a
for you.
really, good piece of wisdom in there for all of us, which is when we're making these big decisions, there is the rushing around energy that goes with it.
Yeah.
And then maybe another thing to try once you've done your rushing around energy thing is just to sit with it for a week, a day, an hour, whatever is appropriate, and just let it sort of settle in and see what emerges from there, and listen, I
Yeah,
think would
beautiful.
be,
Mm.
yeah.
And,
So it's a
and
really nice question,
yeah, and
Zoe. And at different times in your life, those big decisions will
yes,
feel different, but
yes.
that one felt very um, gentle and kind of relatively graceful, if I was to think about those kind of descriptors
Yeah,
for it.
so I got the energy of like peace and serenity, which to me is a distinctive green light. That to me is,
Mm,
if there's a calmness and a quietness that comes with it, I get the sense of knowing, I get the sense of trust,
mm,
because it isn't easy. I mean, I know that we can be very resourceful in the world. Whilst it is a big place, it's quite small in equal measure. We can always make choices and decisions to go back or to do something different. Um, but there's also the decision to trust another, in a partnership, which is very
mm,
new. Trusting
mm,
that somebody's got your back, that comes along with a whole set of other, emotions and feelings. It's livelihood, it's life, it's living, and
mm,
that's living truly. And I think that when you get that level of knowing or serenity or trust within yourself, it is a peaceful feeling. And actually, you know I don't know how to describe love other than those things. That's how I would correlate
mm,
and explain it. So
mm,
how do you, I'm curious about this. Now, I've been a CPO, and I did
mm,
enjoy the job. It's not for me. I'm not built to be a CPO, chief people officer, for those that are wondering. And I was by default, and it was an opportunity that came up, and why wouldn't I win if it was presented? But it was probably the most stressful time that I didn't enjoy in my life. But anyway, coming to the point
mm,
is, how do you balance as a chief people officer? And you've worked with some pretty big organisations and had a lot of responsibility. How do you base your decisions and your choices, with using that instinct and the intellect that comes with the role, the
mm,
responsibility that comes with the role? How does that play out for you? And I know it might be different for different people, but there's a moral compass that HR people have to have. And there's a
mm,
very fine line sometimes with what the organisation asks of us against the moral compass, and
mm,
how we are continually, well, I speak for myself, I've continually been put in, for most of my HR career, which has been 25 years, I've been
mm,
put in that tight walk, that tightrope walk, the fine line between doing what the business wants me to do versus what I feel the moral compass is. And I've
mm,
been, one of the reasons why I've walked away from that role is simply because of this dis-ease, making me physically ill, not being able to
mm,
reconcile these 2 points. And I
mm.
don't know, that's just me, being very truthful and honest. And, I'm not working for a company now, so I can't get in trouble. But, and I'm a rebel, so that's okay. But how do you balance this out? How do you make decisions and choices given the
Mm,
enormity of the role that you have?
mm. So I think there's a kind of whole host of things. If you sort of think about models and frameworks, I mean, we've touched on the gut instinct element of it, which is definitely a big piece. I think about how I can augment my perspective with the perspectives of others. So, I do ask others, what do you think?
Yeah.
What have I missed? What would you do? Uh, what is something I should be thinking about? So, I definitely have a collaborative curiosity before I make a decision to try and shift my perspective significantly so I understand the consequences. I also learned from my time at Turananga o Ngāi Tahu, they had a purpose which is mō tātou a muka uri a muriaki nei, and that is translated into for us and our children after us. So from them, I learned an intergenerational perspective. So, I think, well, will this decision matter in 3 hours? Will it matter in 3 weeks, 3 months, 3 years, and 30 years? So I think about the implications of a decision that I'm making. And then I also think about a lot the various biases that might be playing into my decision. Am I favoring one person's opinion because they're like me? Am I favoring another person's opinion because it was the most recent one I heard? Or am I favoring XYZ angle because it's the path of least resistance? So I do think about the biases that might be inherent. I also learned very early on in my career, not to say or do anything that I would not want on the front page of the newspaper, or I would be regretful if I was called to account on it, or I needed to explain to my loved ones why I had made this decision, and would feel disingenuous or uncomfortable with that level of transparency. I think there are also times where it is perfectly okay to say no. I'm not taking a decision on that, or no, not now, or no, not at all, or to pack your bags and vote with your feet. So I think there's a whole load of things in there, but there are a few frameworks and strategies that I use to help shore up my decision making that have stood me in good stead, thus far.
I love that. And as you were talking, I was thinking about the most unfortunate recent Coldplay Kiss Cam. You'll know exactly what I'm talking about.
Yes.
And I chose not to comment or get involved in it because it was an HR linked relatable incident. Is incident the right thing to say? I think there's two people at play here. Their choices and decisions have been their choices and decisions, and they must live with those consequences. They don't need another person putting the finger at them saying they're right or wrong. I think they bear the consequences. We don't know the surrounding facts. We don't know the surrounding implications of, we don't know what the backdrop is, the background of it. We know nothing. We just saw a less than 30-second kiss cam and that unfold. And I absolutely thought about the decisions and choices in that moment. I was very empathetic because I believe that if people fall in love, they fall in love. Lots of people have affairs, rightly or wrongly. And maybe it wasn't an affair. Maybe their partners have an open marriage. We don't know. We truly don't know. But that to me was the moment that actually I think the HR profession massively let themselves down, because anybody that got involved in the discussion was a part of the problem. And I don't know that they saw it that way. But it was all about, for me, in that moment, there was a choice and there was a decision. And rightly or wrongly, a choice and a decision was made. And what happened in the following aftermath of that was that the fingers of those decisions and choices was put outward. And that's where I said to myself, oh, wow, you're not taking any accountability or responsibility for the decision and choice you made. You made an active, you just didn't want to be caught. Whatever being caught means, by the way. But it's just that and I think that also brought question to me around the subtle line. If it was a marketing person, would anyone have any view of it, or a finance person? No, probably not the same repercussion. But because it's about people, there's a whole moral ground that you must have. And I remember my boss at the time was a guy called Francis Riley, and he said one thing to me. you are never off duty. And to the point
Mm.
that you made is, if you don't want it on the front cover, don't say it, don't do it, because you're never off
Yeah.
duty. You, above all people, used to say to me, like, never off duty. You never stop being your job. And I didn't
Mm.
realize the gravity, what that carried when I was more
Mm.
like 20. I think I was about 27 at that time. I mean, yes, I'm old enough to know, but only years later do I, when moments like that kiss cam happens, I'm like, yeah, okay, I know what you're saying. But
Yeah.
it's also a little bit sad that lots of people chose to get involved and have a say about it. And I'm like, really, it's none of our business. Not really, not
Yeah.
really.
Yeah.
But the choices and decisions was the neon sign to me, like, oh wow, okay, if it's a different choice and different decision, very different outcome.
Yeah, I think there's a really interesting concept in there around the kind of role modeling
Yeah.
that we all play, whether you're in, people in culture or whatever other discipline you're in, where you're in a role where you have responsibility for others. And I remember early in my career, I went through a terrible phase when I was consulting, of just working really long and really hard, because I thought success, there was some kind of correlation between sacrifice and success. If you sacrifice more, there would be higher odds you would be successful. Um, that there is no correlation, by the way. But what happened for me was, I was working very long, I was working very hard. It would not be uncommon for me to sleep overnight in the office couch, and get up and just start the next day. And what there was a number of things which helped me change that very unhealthy behavior. One of the most compelling ones was, I was responsible for that office at the time, and I found somebody else copying me. So they had also slept overnight in the office on another night, because they thought, if Justine did it, it must be a good thing to do. And I was so ashamed of myself, Zoe, that someone would copy my bad choice. And so that is also another element of, when we're making choices, whatever they might happen to be, what signals are we sending to others? Are we being a good ambassador? Are we being a good role model to those that might be following us formally, or to those that just might be open to being influenced by us in some way, shape, or form? So that also now plays heavily into my decision making, which is, if other people emulated this or copied this, would this be a healthy, inclusive, sustainable behavior or practice? Because certainly back in the day, the people that copied my bad role modeling, I was making bad choices, and others saw me as a role model and emulated my bad choices, which was not what I wanted to be doing, you know,
Mm.
as a leader. So I think there's another element to
Yeah.
these choices, where other
Yeah.
people observe it, and what do they take from it, which is an important consideration.
I absolutely agree, and I think that it brings to mind something quite contradictory for me, which has come up, and I wonder your view on it. And I know that, I mean, there's another whole podcast talking about, we are maybe similar age group, and I think that generational behaviour. I too have done choices and decisions that others have copied, and I've been furious. And I'm like,
Mm,
don't do as I do as I say. That's very
mm,
hypocritical. And I
mm,
don't, if I'm asking you to clean the toilet, it's because I'm willing to clean the toilet myself. I'm
mm,
not, just as an example, right? So I'm not saying there's anything derogatory against cleaning toilets. Thank God people clean toilets, and I clean my own
mm,
toilet. But it
yeah,
brings into question about authenticity, because
mm,
how can we be very authentic if we can't really be ourselves, because we're over our shoulder thinking that somebody might emulate our behavior,
mm,
or because we're not perfect,
mm,
and we might make some decisions and choices that aren't always brilliant, but in the moment they may have felt, right and cohesive with who we are and what we want out of life. It's a very, very tough and delicate line. But
mm,
my question is, can we be authentic? Can people in HR specifically be authentic to their core and be in a leadership role in HR? That's a question.
mm,
I'm not sure I can answer it fully, because I'm not sure I
mm,
believe that you can. That's my
mm.
belief. What's your reaction to that?
Yeah, it's a really good question, Zoe. So I think, there's a lot of conversation about authenticity, which I'm a really big fan of. People want to know you and understand you and understand your vulnerabilities and your quirks and your eccentricities. And we talk a lot about bringing your whole self to work. Um, and then there is also another kind of school of thought, which is, I don't know if we want to bring absolutely everything to work, because there is a few things about me, for example, that maybe just need to be best just left at home. That it does, there's a certain level of requirement.
See this,
So I
I
accept
it
all of my
says all my
quirks.
quirks and my uniqueness, but and that if I do that, then we can see it. So I've just held a little thing up that's in front of me, which is, I think first of all we have to be accepting of ourselves. We don't need to share everything, but we need to be in resonance with ourselves, with it, to be truthful with ourselves. But that truth may never leave our lips, but that we know it in our heart.
Yes.
So I totally agree with you that sometimes there are things that are best unsaid, and I totally agree with that. And I
Mm.
think that really the question is what do we mean by authenticity? Um,
Yeah.
and is it with ourselves or is it external? And I kind of like, I'm circling back to that, being authentic and truthful with my truth for me.
Mhm.
And actually I don't need to explain it or defend it, or it just is within me, and that's okay. My decisions will be based on that, and I don't necessarily have to explain why I make a
Mhm.
decision or choice, because that's, otherwise we're just explaining our existence, and that doesn't feel very good either. But yeah,
Yeah.
I agree. There's things about us that we don't perhaps need to share. And social media makes it so easy to
Yeah.
talk, because lots of people want advocacy, they want likes, they want to be vulnerable, they want to kind of show
Mm,
themselves so that people like them. So actually, from an NLP level, you
mm,
know that most of the things are for protection or acceptance. Like, people want to be
mm,
loved. I want to be loved,
mm,
and I want to be enough.
mhm.
And so I think that some people overshare simply for, and I've been a victim of this. Not now, thank God, but yeah. And it's a hard walk being in HR.
Yeah, it's a real delicate balance, and I think, I'm a big fan of being authentic, and I'm a big individualist, and I love everyone's eccentricities and uniquenesses. And then there is a point at which, when it's bring everything, bring your whole self to work. If I'm having a grumpy day, which happens to all of us, there's no need for my team to suffer through that. So there's a level of self regulation I
Yes.
need to bring, and some discipline. But I might say to, someone at work, yeah, it's just, I'm not quite myself today. But so there's a, element of sharing, but there's a level of self-regulation. I think because of the ripple effect, that if I'm
Yes.
grumpy, then
Yes.
the team becomes grumpy, and it's unnecessary. The other thing is there's a really nice Maya Angelou quote, which I'm sure you would have heard, and all of your listeners too, which is, once you know better, do better. So, there's times where maybe my self-regulation hasn't been that great. I acknowledge that, and then I will try and do better. So it's not about the pursuit of perfection necessarily, but rather as I come to know better, then I need to
Mm.
lift my standard to the next level. And so I think there's something really beautiful in that. Once you know better, do better.
Yeah. And how to be the best version of yourself. You
Yeah.
know, if we take all of these, like you said in an earlier conversation, is everything is a data point, everything is information, and we are so blessed to receive certain information and reactions and feedback. And if we don't use it to become the best version of ourselves, then really, I say, you know, once bitten, twice shy, I guess. Like once you do something, shame on you. Second time, shame on me. It's kind of like almost these old cliches that I never used to pay attention to. I'm like, oh yeah, that resonates. But it's been such an amazing time to spend with you, get to know Justine better, hear about your love story. And we're wrapping up for the day, which is just I love this part of, you know, when I was considering doing a podcast, somebody said to me, "Oh, it takes so much time, and you know, you're not going to make money from it." And I was like, "Well, I'm not doing it to make money from it. I mean, if it made money, that would be fantastic. But I want to meet amazing people, and I want to be able to shine a light on them and be able to others to hear their amazingness." And I think you're amazing, Justine. I've said that before, and I'm really glad that our paths are crossed and that you're in my world, and you do make it sunnier and brighter. And I really am so grateful for you coming on ZED Talks today. Thank you. And I know that for the listeners, they may want to connect with you. So there'll be a description and there'll be your links to connect with you and get to know you more. And I just want to say a huge, huge thanks to you being with us today.
Well, I've loved it, Zoe. Thank you for the opportunity, and thank you to your listeners for tuning in. And isn't it great that we can share our stories and share our wisdom? So I hope from the conversation that you and I have had today, there's some little nuggets of wisdom or kind of gems of reflection people can take. So
Absolutely.
I've loved it, Zoe. It's been a real privilege and great fun. So thank you for having me.
Oh, thank you so much. Well, until next time, tune in and tell us what you love about the podcast and vlog. You know, you have the opportunity as a listener to shape what we want, and maybe you want to appear on the show and talk about something that's, you know, deep passionate for you, or that you want to explore. So this is unedited, unfiltered, and unscripted, and this is Zoe from ZED Talks. Until next time, thank you so much. Bye for now.